I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Hatchett, who's the head of the Centre for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. Gosh, I got through that. I knew I was going to struggle there. An organisation that works with, among others, Bill Gates, lots of governments around the world, lots of very important international organisations. And your current focus, Richard, is really identifying the vaccines that are going to work. So you are the man who probably knows more about this than anyone. Tell us a bit about where you think we are on the path to an effective vaccine and which ones, in your view, look most promising.
Well, the numbers that we just saw are absolutely extraordinary if you take into account the fact that we've only been dealing with this virus for about 10 months. To have that many vaccines moving into clinical trials, having 9 vaccines in phase 3, that's absolutely unprecedented. So I think the progress that we're making is remarkable. I think the data that we have seen, the vaccines that are in phase 3, we've begun to see data from their phase 1 studies, maybe a hint of data from their phase 2 studies. But so far, it's been encouraging.
Can I just ask you, there are some people who worry that maybe corners are being cut in a way that ultimately could do damage. Is that a legitimate worry?
I don't think so. We are moving at speed. We are trying to deliver vaccines in record time, but safety is paramount. And that's why we are doing these large phase 3 clinical trial studies. I mean, these are studies in some cases in as many as 30,000, in one case up to 60,000 people. And the reason you do those trials is, one, to demonstrate conclusively that the vaccines work, that they can protect people from disease, severe illness, and death, and two, to show in a large population that they are safe. And, the concerns about safety that people have and the concerns about vaccine hesitancy, the data on the chart that we just looked at, are understandable in the context of rapid efforts to develop vaccines. But making sure that we perform appropriate clinical trials and can demonstrate conclusively that the vaccines are safe, and then that we continue to monitor their safety as they move into being used in larger numbers of people, even post-licensure, is absolutely critical.
Now, in your view, when do you think the earliest we can expect proper approval for a vaccine? And then, following proper approval, how long till millions of people will get it?
Well, it's going to depend vaccine by vaccine, of course. They're moving at different paces. I think the earliest vaccines, the ones that are in phase 3 clinical trials now, could plausibly begin to show efficacy data, effectiveness data, even before the end of the year. And many countries, such as the United States, the European Medicines Authority, have this authority. You were just describing a potential change to the regulations here in the UK, have what are called emergency use authorization. The emergency use authorization shows that the vaccines have been shown to be effective, and that safety data that has accumulated to that date doesn't suggest that they are unsafe, and that the balance of the risk-benefit ratio under the circumstances favors the early use of the vaccine. Most regulatory authorities like to see 6 months of accumulated safety data before they would license a vaccine.
So but we're not going to get that. We're not going to get that, are we?
Well, I think we might for full licensure. So if a trial started, say, in September and it shows effectiveness by December, you might get an emergency use authorization in December, January, but the safety data wouldn't mature until, say, March or April, and that would be the point at which full licensure might be extended.
I mean, talking to senior scientists here, they believe the earliest we will see a mass vaccination program is broadly the spring of next year. Does that sound right to you?
I think so. When we initiated our vaccine development programs, and this was last January, we set what we thought was a very ambitious target of 12 to 18 months for the delivery of vaccines, broadly. And I think the vaccine development programs have not run into major obstacles yet. I mean, we can talk about the AstraZeneca issue in just a minute. I'm sure you were going to ask about that. But I think we're still on target to see some vaccines that are licensed sometime in the first half of 2021. And many of the vaccine manufacturers are already beginning to manufacture at scale so that they have large stocks of vaccine ready when the vaccines are approved.
Now, a senior scientist here said the one area where they have no visibility is what's happening in China, and he thought it was possible, but I wondered if you had any insight into this, that actually the Chinese might come up with an effective vaccine rather earlier than the ones we're seeing in the West. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, China has a thriving biotech sector, and they do have very extensive vaccine development experience. They've got a number of vaccines. 4 of the 9 vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials right now are Chinese vaccines. They're all what are called inactivated vaccines. This is basically a killed virus preparation that is then used to immunize. One of the challenges that the Chinese have faced, of course, is that they don't have any disease in China, so they can't do effectiveness studies in China, and they're having to do those studies in locations where the virus is circulating. But they have the largest number of vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials right now. So it is possible that they would be among the earliest vaccines that would be licensed.
Now, there's been a bit of controversy in America, and you've worked for a couple of American presidents, after Donald Trump sort of indicated that he was hopeful he'd get a vaccine before the presidential election. But from what you're saying, that's just for the birds. That's just not going to happen.
I would say that is pretty unlikely, given where the vaccines are. I mean, it is possible that the U.S. FDA does have this emergency use authorization that I mentioned. It is possible that some of the trials could lead to emergency use authorization before the end of the year. Would it happen before November 3rd? I don't think so, but I can't absolutely say it wouldn't happen.
Now, frustrating, we're almost out of time. There's one other very important point, I know it's on your mind, which is there anything that can be done to stop, in a sense, the rich countries, and obviously people think of America in this context particularly, essentially hogging all the virus? If we look at someone like India, where, it's a terrible problem at the moment, parts of Africa, the terrible problems. Is there any way of stopping rich countries simply, hogging and hoarding the virus and the vaccine and letting the virus therefore sort of let rip in poorer parts of the world?
Well, this is one of the things that we've been working hardest on over the last 6 months, and it's to create mechanisms that allow global access to vaccine when it becomes available to all countries, irrespective of their income level. We've been working with the World Health Organization and with Gavi on what we are calling the COVAX initiative, and you may have heard about the COVAX facility, which is essentially an effort to bring countries together to support the research and development of vaccines, but also to support the procurement, and then to ensure globally fair allocation of that vaccine to all countries so that they can protect their most vulnerable populations at the same time. If that happens, and we have had over 170 countries now have expressed interest, and actually midnight Friday, we will find out how many make legal commitments to join this effort. This would be absolutely extraordinary. It's difficult to overstate the significance of a global effort to come together to end the pandemic. We're very hopeful. The United Kingdom has worked closely with us. They've been a big supporter of this effort for what we would call, I think, vaccine multilateralism in opposition to vaccine nationalism.
Yeah.
And we're very hopeful that the world will come together to do exactly what you said.
Well, that's tremendously good news, and we need a bit of good news at the moment. Lovely to talk to you.